Welcome to the PIRMA Third Thursday webinar series. My name is Kim Moretti and I am the Township Manager in East Pikeland Township in Chester County and currently serve as the chair on the PIRMA Board of Directors. Thank you for joining us today for our program titled Cyber Coverage, Liability, and Best Practices. It will be presented by a panel including attorney Mike Crotty from Siena Law, Andrew DiProspero from H.A. Thompson, and Lee Cain, a cyber risk services advisor at Sedgwick. They will discuss various aspects of cyber risk, PIRMA coverage, and best practices to mitigate cyber risk. We are now in our third year of offering the Third Thursday webinar series, and this year we are going to change it up a bit by offering programs both in the morning and afternoons to widen our audience base. We value your feedback on any of the programs PIRMA offers or programs you would like to see created, so please complete the survey sent to you following this program. We're always looking for new Third Thursday topics, so please let us know of any topics that would be useful to you. Just a reminder that PIRMA now offers the PIRMA Legal Access Program, where all members are eligible for up to 120 minutes of free legal consultation annually on a wide range of matters. This may include a question about a right to know request, a personnel issue, a zoning or land use matter, just about any legal question that needs a quick but thorough answer. More information on the new PIRMA Legal Access Program can be found at on our website at PIRMA.org. And watch your email for PIRMA e-blasts that announce additional educational opportunities, information on the Loss Control Grant Program, and resources that can be found in the PIRMA Resource Library on the new PIRMA website. You will also find recordings of past Third Thursday programs under the Seminars tab. Please join us next month on March 16th when we will replay a previous popular Third Thursday topic, police use of force and government oversight. Until then, enjoy today's program.
All right. Excuse me. Good morning, everybody. I'm Andrew. I work at H.A. Thompson. As Kim mentioned, we are the marketing service and loss control provider for PIRMA. PIRMA has been around since 1987. H.A. Thompson's been doing it with PIRMA since 1987. I've been here since 1991, so I've been handling PIRMA for 30 plus years. Our other presenters are Mike Crotty. Mike is a lawyer at Siena Law. He gets to touch on some of the more interesting things that are going on out there in the legal environment for you guys, including the Pennsylvania Breach of Personal Information Act, and there's an upcoming change to that, and a recent Supreme Court case, Dittman versus the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which is interesting as it relates to what we're going to talk about today. Lee Cain does work for Sedgwick. They're the administrator of PIRMA. He's a cyber risk advisor. The interesting thing about Lee, and I haven't met Lee, but I was reading his biography here. And when I saw that he has a psychology background, my assumption is Lee is going to answer the important question that I get all the time, which is, why are these people doing this? Don't they have anything better to do than to sit in their parents' basement and to hack into our computer system? So you guys think Lee's going to touch on all the computer stuff, but no, in reality, I think he should spend about 20 minutes and answer that question for us, but we'll see how he does when we get over to Lee. The things that we're going to talk about objective-wise today are the current trends. I'll reach out to you guys on that. As I mentioned, Mike's going to talk about your legal risk, which is increasing, not decreasing these days. And then finally, Lee is going to hit the best practices. So as far as the current trends go, the first cyber policy was written in 1997. So this isn't really a new thing anymore. But overall, I work in, you guys know, I work in the insurance business. So for the last, 15 years or so, we've had multiple carriers that have come to us and they're looking to grow. Their insurance business, they're looking to increase their business. And they hit on years ago, like, hey, this new exposure, we could really sell some policies here. So they spent years and years trying to work with agents like myself and say, well, you guys really should push this cyber stuff. And then, all of a sudden, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they realized, well, geez, we're really starting to get a lot of claims here. Now, all of a sudden, what you're seeing is they're starting to increase premiums a lot. They are starting to back off. I think one of the things that we'll see that Lee will touch on is the fact that some of the things that he's going to mention, such as multi-factor, not with PIRMA, but with a lot of carriers. I've had a couple of clients that have been canceled because they don't have multi-factor authentication. So we've gone from this idea of like, hey, write all this business, to now it's like, hey, we actually like this business, but only if. And they're really cutting down and looking at things that they want you to do. As far as the rate increases go, a lot of people are seeing 30, 35% rate increases. As far as the overall marketplace, it's still a small part of the insurance market, but just from the last year that we have available, 2020 to 2021, the actual cyber market itself increased 60%. So you can see that this is a growing part of what's going on out there. Overall, I just want to tell you a little bit about the coverage that you do have in place with PIRMA. PIRMA put cyber breach coverage in place for all of its members in 2018. There's a $250,000 limit. And ultimately, this comes down to covering two things. One is breach events, and the other is what I'm going to call cyber extortion. So breach event is if somebody's personal information is taken from your system. Under Pennsylvania law, you owe them notification. You have to notify them. The policy will pay to help you do that. I want you to keep in mind that there's a $10,000 deductible now with this coverage. So, if a breach notification is actually, the cost of that's maybe $150, $160 per record, the big thing that the policy does is it helps you do this. You're going to pay some money for it, but it'll also do things like set up credit monitoring on individuals whose information was taken. And if their credit has been harmed because of this, it'll pay to help them restore their credit. I actually had this happen to me in 2014, and it's a time-consuming and difficult process. So it would help people if their information is taken from your computer system. It would also pay to help you if you have a system failure to restore your data. So as far as a system failure goes, this would be, your computers are taken down. And if we flip to the next slide, part of this could be because of of a cyber extortion event. So this could be either your system is totally taken down, or there's a threat to release information. So let's think about this in two different ways. One, you come in one day and you just can't get into your system, you're locked out. You could do one of two things probably. You could pay a ransom. Again, Lee will probably touch on the idea of, do you want to pay the ransom or not? I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and, there's a huge push now from the government, from law enforcement, to tell folks to stop paying ransoms. You guys as municipalities might be a little bit different than a business, right? I have a friend whose business was shut down. And they were right on the verge of paying a ransom before they got their data restored. And why would they pay a ransom? Because their business was completely shut down, and they were like, well, if we don't get this running, we're going to be out of business permanently here in a couple of weeks. So, that we would all be sweating it out. But for municipalities, I think you guys might have a little bit more ability to decide to restore your data, and the PIRMA policy would help you do that. I think something else that you guys might have is, let's say somebody takes your information, but you still have access to it. But especially if you think in terms of your police department, you have info taken from your police department, and that could be information on things like ongoing investigations. You might not want that out there in the public realm. So you might decide like, well, maybe we will pay this person $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. You're always going to be left with this idea of honor among thieves, in that they still have your information. The only thing you're doing is paying them and actually truly hoping that they don't release your information. There's a couple of other things that PIRMA covers. Telecommunications fraud. This would be your phone system is hacked, and people just make 1-800 number calls and it gets thrown back to you by the phone company in the form of a large phone bill. And there are some post-breach remediation costs. In other words, it'll help you to upgrade your system. And they're going to come in, the folks that would help you with the breach, and tell you, this is what your problem was. This is how you fix it, and we'll give you a little bit of money to help you fix it. I mentioned the $10,000 deductible. The other thing I want to mention is this idea of a systemic claim and tell you what that is. This goes all the way back to what I originally spoke about, which is this idea that the insurance companies are now looking at the cyber coverage that they were begging us to sell for them years ago because they wanted to grow. All of a sudden they realized, 4 or 5 years ago, that there was the potential for a systemic claim. And that's been a driver in much of what's going on in the cyber marketplace. A systemic claim is one event affects multiple people at the same time. So you think about it, we're doing insurance. One person's building burning down does not necessarily affect a municipality 10 miles away. So we have this spreading of risk. In the cyber marketplace, they're starting to look at the fact that this idea of spreading of risk is actually converging, insofar as we could have a hack or a breach event or a denial of service event that would put multiples of accounts out at the exact same time, triggering multiple policies and multiple policy limits at the same time. So PIRMA in its reinsurance arrangement has a $2 million limit for a systemic claim. So if there ever is a claim that affects multiple members at the same time, even though you have a $250,000 limit, you're capped overall pool-wise at a $2 million limit for the systemic claim. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Mike Crotty, and he's going to take it from there.
Sure, thanks, Andrew. So I wanted to just touch on some of the legal aspects before Lee Cain gets into some of the mechanical training issues that we want to look at in terms of cyber breach events and what happens. And primarily on the legal side, primarily to address two things. The second one is the one that's on the screen, which is what is our exposure from a lawsuit when a claim related to a cyber breach event happens, and how that's an expanding area of the law, and more we can expect to see claims over time come from third parties whose information was stolen from a cyber breach event, either through like a negligence claim under the state law where we have to notify people, or some other theory that's out there. The second component, and Andrew kind of touched on it in terms of the documents that we have out there and what do we do? Because what do we do in terms of planning to protect the integrity of our documents? Because while an insurance policy is great, a liability policy is certainly great to deal with the after effects. Lee will, of course, talk about the training of staff and how to address that. But one of the things to think about is, as a lot of us are starting to go more and more digital with our township and borough and municipal records, is there that physical backup that's still in place, or are we solely relying on an electronic copy, a scanned in copy of something for our primary record retention? And in that front, of course, to make sure that the township can continue functioning after a cyber breach event, when someone comes in for a permit, and to make sure that you have both some integrity and the substance of the documents that you've always had, it's probably an important practice to keep and maintain that hard copy system of files somewhere, whether you keep it on site or if you ship that off somewhere to like an Iron Mountain for long-term storage. But just so you maintain a physical hard copy that someone can always go to if the computers don't work anymore for whatever reason. So jumping over to the legal aspects, however, the first, we have a statutory responsibility to address and account for confidential information of anyone that, any information that we've gathered. And that primarily comes in the form of social security numbers, driver's license numbers, account numbers, and credit card numbers. And we might think, oh, well, we probably, we're just a small township, we don't have that information. Except what you want to start thinking about is, one, with our employees, do we keep all that information on hand? For our CDL drivers, for police officers, when we do our Act 57 background checks, what information is on the computer that could potentially be released to third parties if our system is breached? So secondly, apart from our employees, we have to look at, are we gathering credit card information and other account number information for sewer accounts or other accounts where people pay us money for any kind of services we provide? Sewer is probably the big ones. Sewer and water are probably the biggest ones. But if we have that, or if a third-party administrator that we have running those has it, there's some potential exposure there that if that's leaked out, we can run into some issues. The law requires that we give notification to those people under the Breach of Personal Information Act without unreasonable delay. What does that mean? Who knows? Typically, we want to get it out as quickly as possible, but of course, the first thing you have to do is get your arms around how much information and what information has been compromised and exposed, and who are you sending the notices to make sure that you're not oversending. You don't want to freak everybody out by telling them their information has been compromised when it may not have been. And you also want to be worried under the act about underrepresenting, not telling everybody whose information has been compromised that they've been compromised. That's where those services that Andrew spoke about, and which are part and parcel of the coverages that are out there, that they help pay for third-party companies to come in and do that work for us, to get those notices out, get them out timely, and then do the credit reporting as it's needed. If we have more than 1,000 accounts or piece of information that have been compromised, there is a requirement that we do consumer reporting, consumer agency reporting. That's if you remember from like what the Equifax breach a couple years ago. That's just that someone gets a free year or 2 years or 3 years of credit monitoring, where if any credit issues come up, they're alerted to them. It could also be a violation of the unfair trade practices and consumer protection law. Now, that's not something that an individual third party can make a claim against us for, but it is one that the Attorney General can bring a claim against you. So that's certainly something you don't want. And for a lot of years, that was kind of it. That was the risk. And if you look at these, other than us paying money out to get these things done, we're not paying out money to third parties because of these claims or breaches directly. But that's where the change is coming, and change is starting to happen in the law. And one of the primary vehicles that authorized that, or is kind of opening the door for that, is Dittman versus University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. It was a class action lawsuit brought by about 62,000 UPMC employees. There was a 2014 cyber breach event, and that resulted of the hospital system, and it resulted in a whole bunch of their personal and financial information being stolen. Some of that stolen information was allegedly or apparently used on the black market to file fraudulent tax returns and stolen credit. The question under Dittman was whether that employee, whether UPMC had a legal duty to use reasonable safeguards to protect that information. And after a lot of back and forth between the lower courts, because this was really a a contested issue. And the defense argument to this would be, well, hold on a minute. If someone comes and breaks into my house and steals all of the jewelry that's in there, that's not my fault. It's the person who came in and stole the jewelry, not mine. The courts, though, have come out and said no. Employers, I'm sorry, have a duty and a recovery of have a duty to maintain that information, safeguard that information, and take reasonable and appropriate steps to make sure you're protecting it. And if you don't do it, the people whose information has been stolen or breached can get pecuniary damages back against you. And pecuniary, of course, is money. July of 2021, that case was, of course, remanded back down from the Supreme Court after that standard was set. And ultimately, UPMC had to pay out $2.7 million in damages to those employees, to those 62,000 employees. And just to show that it's not an isolated case, that it's not going to happen again, there was a class action lawsuit just in May of 2021 against the Pennsylvania Department of Health because 72,000 folks had their private and health information stolen from the health department. And with that, given that legal framework, that background of can we be liable, I think we'll now turn it over to Lee to talk about how do we best protect ourselves, what the situation is, both regionally and nationwide, and how we're starting to see these cyber breach events crop up.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for letting me join in with this presentation. We're just going to go through some of the best practices to help mitigate some of these cyber risks and what we're seeing. We're going to go through a couple of slides with some stats. These are victims by state, and you can see Pennsylvania is currently 8th. But these are stats that are what's getting reported. There's probably quite a few incidents that are not getting reported. Just reason it's just not being reported. So these are all stats from the 2021 IC3 FBI website. Next slide, please. This slide is a total victim loss by state, and so that's very similar to some of the stats we saw for the victims by state before, but there's a little bit more money, probably more income, more people from these states, but you can currently see Pennsylvania's 5th in this area. Next slide, please. These are stats for crime by type for victim count. So you got different exploits shown here, different malware. You've got different no lead value. That's the top one, which is what really is insufficient data to pursue a case. You've got the second one is non-payment, non-delivery. This is where a victim pays for something but doesn't get delivery for it. The third one is identity theft. That's the personal identified information that they can take it and do credit cards or put in for tax returns. I had my in-laws just had that happen to them just recently. And then a personal data breach. That's social security numbers, passports getting taken, driver's license numbers, those kind of things. Next slide, please. This is a slide for victims by age group. And so you can see the older we get, the more it looks like the more susceptible to the cyber crimes. But also this is an age group that's got more money. You got retirees, you got people that are on the verge of retirement, that are, kids have left for college. So that's where the money is a big jump between 40 and 50 for these victims by age group. Next slide, please. This is the evolution of cybercrime. Cybercrimes, crime has been around forever. Cybercrime is kind of evolved. It's kind of evolved from regular crime, phone calls, phone hacking. In the 80s and 70s and 80s, we actually had a phone hacking at a previous employment where somebody hacked in, not just to steal something, but just to mess things up. The 90s, that's where the malicious software and malicious malware started to emerge. I mean, the actual first wild virus that came out in 1986. So, then the first cyber policy written in 1997. So it went pretty quickly, the evolution of cybercrime. And in the early 2000s, we have cyber criminals emerging to monetize personal identifiable information and convert it into currency. And then the 2020s, we've got the evolution of ransomware and cryptocurrency and denial of service attacks to get that cryptocurrency and to get those ransomwares paid. The next slide, please.
Hey, Lee, is cryptocurrency still kind of the preferred method of payment for
It does.
any
I have
ransoms?
Haven't been hearing much about a change due to all the troubles with cryptocurrency lately. But I think that's still the best form of payment for the criminals. Next slide, please. So most hackers need less than 10 hours to find a weakness. It just depends on, this is from a series of experts at the SAN Institute, but it depends on what's in your environment. Why do hackers attack your environment? That's the whole philosophy, the psychology part of it. Why do they attack people? Why do they spend time doing it? Well, it's the same. The same kind of philosophy as keeping stuff in your car. Things that are visible, things that are easily, seen and taken. That's what they're going to be. That's what they're going to be after. And so, we need to try to make it tougher for people to access our data and to steal our stuff. And so, even with a series of firewalls and protections, it could still take a hacker 10 hours to find the weakness. And then in the end, some of your weakest protections are your people. And we'll get into that about training later on. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and Lee, I was going to ask a question on that. In terms of,
Sure.
We're saying hackers, but in terms of the people that are accessing this information, are there any stats or overall trends in terms of who is the one that's getting into the information? Is it somebody over in Russia, or is some kind of disgruntled employee, or somebody more local who's trying to make some kind of political point?
Well, I wouldn't know if there's any trends, but there's still quite a few on there's still quite a few groups that are doing the ransomware. They're still out there, but this is according to the Penniman Institute in 2019, the cost of a data breach per record for the United States was $233 per record. So it's I still think that there's quite a number of groups. There's probably more going on than we realize. But that's the trick for IT. You have to plan for all sorts of things getting into your stuff. I mean, it's just like life. It's the same. It's the same thing. Next slide, please. The cyber kill chain. So this is how the cyber threats operate. So we're going to talk about that. The first the cyber criminals do is they do a lot of research about an organization. It's one of the things I recommend not doing is putting users' email addresses on the web. And so hackers and threat actors will harvest email addresses, investigate open ports, and other valuable information that they can. Second, they'll move into weaponization, where they'll embed an exploit into an executable backdoor and then execute that to see all your files and directories. Third, they'll weaponize that package through email or a USB device. And while you're surfing the web, they'll deliver it to your system. Fourth, they'll take advantage of that exploit and they'll discover and execute the malware on your system. And then they'll install the malware on other systems that they can access. When they access those systems, in some instances, the user may have local admin permissions. That could lead to domain admin permissions, who just depends on what they can access. And once they have domain admin permissions, they could instigate, execute commands that are normal for the network. 6, they'll open that communication channel and then utilize remote access to other systems and connect back to their control server. Next slide, please. And never underestimate the cyber threats that we're currently facing. We need to be 100% right. Cyber criminals only have to be right one time, but we need to make sure that all of our networks and ports and everything is taken care of and documented and planned out, and so that we, if something does happen, we can get back to a normal situation we were operating before the breach happened. Next slide, please. So what is ransomware? Ransomware is a malware that encrypts the victim's data with an encryption key, and it's only known, that encryption key is only known to the cyber criminal, and they will basically lock your data until a ransom is paid, usually by Bitcoin or some other form of cryptocurrency. Next slide, please. So ransomware in 2021, the top countries that got hit, the United States, with quite a few hits from the last year. United Kingdom and Germany were second and third. Next slide, please. So the key steps in a ransomware attack. Here's an example from that cyber kill chain that we talked about. Cyber criminals do a lot of research. And so in this example, they visited a website's About Us page and noticed that they listed the controller's email address on it. Second, they moved into the weaponization part where they craft a phishing email from Purdue alumni for the controller, asking them to click a link to update contact information for the 10th reunion. And then that link loads a TrickBot malware. Third, they send that TrickBot package through email to a controller, and the controller clicks on the link, and then the weaponized TrickBot is downloaded to their system. And then fourth, the exploit controller having local admin rights. Again, there's some local admin rights that's going to come to bite somebody. That local admin will execute the malware on their system, and now they sit and wait. And then a few weeks later, a domain admin logs in, and at that time, once the hacker is on there, and now they've got the domain admin login, they can perform maintenance and run commands that are normal for that network. After that, the cyber criminal opens a communication channel back to their servers, and then they can utilize remote access. They can sit and download, they can upload, they can execute commands and execute code to identify more targets, and they can exfiltrate data and encrypt all of the equipment and backups. So that's the steps that happened in a ransomware attack, and quite a number of these steps happen without the user knowing it. So what is cryptocurrency? Well, it's very complicated. Cryptocurrency is a digital form of money that uses encryption to mostly verify the transfer of funds between parties without a central bank or any other form of third-party mediation. And that's why cryptocurrency is a favorite among cyber criminals. There's also a crypto mining malware, which is called cryptojacking. This targets a compromised system's computer resources in order to mine cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. This malware uses the system's CPU to help the cyber criminal get more cryptocurrency. Around 3/4 or 74% of ransomware revenue resulted from attacks from Russian threat actors. and with more than 40 million worth of cryptocurrency going to ransomware strains. The other areas were North Korea and Iran. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that's always come up is, should we pay the ransom? Big debate on whether or not that in the cyber industry about paying the ransom. The average ransom demands are up 518%, with actual payments up to 82%. Because there's no honor in criminals ever, let alone cyber criminals. Even if the ransom is paid to the criminal, it doesn't automatically mean that that they're going to give you back your data. In addition, they could potentially initiate, a second system infection and try to extort more money. So that's it. Having a solid data backup is probably the best strategy for your single best strategy against ransomware in general. Next slide, please.
Hey, Lee, if you have one of these events where they've kind of hijacked your whole system and you've paid the ransomware, what's the next step? Is it essentially to take everything and start over anyway? Or can you really trust that whatever you've been given back hasn't been altered, doesn't have something hidden in itself that's gonna just trip this again, maybe in a few years? Or
well, hopefully we've done hopefully we've done a little bit of forensics before they've gone off and paid the ransom right away. I think if you've got to use, it's part of training your users. If you've had something that doesn't look right, that looks like it's doing something, that it shouldn't be, getting that device off the network is probably the first thing you'd want to do. I think paying the ransom on an advice from either legal or the claims department is the best solution.
And are you generally getting law enforcement involved in any way, where you're going to report this to the FBI or even your local police department to
I
get their
generally
thumbs up
don't.
on?
Who knows what if you get law enforcement involved, they probably are going to want grab evidence, take evidence. It would probably be best to at least go through legal or the claims department to find out what kind of forensics we can do ahead of time before if legal law enforcement could possibly just take the machines and we not get them back and do our own forensics on it. So advice of legal and claims department would be the best solution. So now that we've gone over the cyber kill chain and the steps in attack, let's talk about layers of defense that break that cyber kill chain. First is limit personal information available on the web. Don't put direct email addresses on there. Maybe bucket email addresses would be best, like contact us or finance, or maybe not even finance. Don't even tell them that there's a finance department. Contact us is probably the best form, to best email to be listed. Implement email filtering, disable and block remote desktop protocol. Those are conduits to an attack, and email is the biggest one, because it's our users' contact with the outside world. So that's having robust email filtering such as Barracuda and Proofpoint are a good solution. Develop security awareness training programs and implement endpoint detection and response. The training programs are really good. They've got to be consistent, got to be enough to long enough and detailed enough for the user to get something out of it, but also be mindful of links and be cautious of everything that comes in. Be cautious of business email compromise. It could be coming from somebody else and not your CEO. So always kind of be mindful of emails coming in. Disable local admin rights. That's a big one. I understand the need for some of the maybe legacy software that needed local admin rights, but man, that's a huge risk when your users have local administration rights on their machines. They can run software without an administrator knowing it. It's just a huge risk. And domain admin accounts that are linked to a user. Best practice would be to have a domain admin account that's strictly just a domain admin account, or rename. But users that have normal user accounts that are also domain admin accounts is not recommended. And also requiring multi-factor authentication for those accounts. If they're mostly, if you've got some domain admin accounts that are shared between smaller staffs, yes, you'd want to have some multi-factor authentication set up for those accounts. You want to allow access to only approved destinations on the internet. So you want to have a good, robust internet filtering solution, and also keep your backups disconnected after they've been completed. Disconnected from the network means that they can't be altered or changed from a connection. So keeping them off the network is a great solution. Next slide, please. So responding to an attack, remain calm. I know it's hard sometimes. When I was in IT, that was one of the hardest things, was especially during an attack, and to remain calm. I remember being on the phone one time with Symantec during an antivirus call, and people were running around kind of panicking, and I picked up the phone and listened, and next thing I heard was the Darth Vader theme on the Symantec's hold music. But it helped us remain calm. I mean, it kind of made light of the situation, but yeah, it's hard to, sometimes it is hard to remain calm and not panic. So sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's real or fake. And so if you get something suspicious in an email, stop, don't click on it. Ask your IT department, if this is real or not. When I was in IT, I always preferred people asking, is this real or not? I would much rather, deal with them and say, no, this is not real, or yes, this is real, or even, I would rather deal with that than a cyber breach or a ransomware attack. And we touched on it earlier, contacting the insurance claims department. We want to make sure that we're doing the steps right. So, and we don't want to do anything out of step. So we need some guidance, and the claims department from your cyber claims should be able to provide further instructions on the next steps. Next slide, please. So if claims determines you've been breached, they'll collect information from you about the incident at hand, open a claim, and then proceed into the investigation and the remediation phase. And that's why I recommend that you contact claims first before you contact law enforcement, because who knows how they're going to collect that information on the breach. Next slide, please. So to help retain and contain and remediate your information, they're gonna be focused on resuming normal business operations as soon as possible. And so collecting evidence and preserving evidence, pulling that network cable, once you've seen somebody that's had an attack, taking that person or user, if it is a user, taking them off the network, making sure that they can't get anywhere else on the network, and make sure nobody else can get in to that PC. Performing root cause analysis, handling all of the notifications that need to be sent out as a result of the potential breach. That's what they'll be focusing on. And then they'll be focusing on restoring your data from the backups and re-imaging all systems if the systems have been breached. They'll also do further analyzing of the forensic data to predict any potential future attacks that could occur. And they'll do, this is all part of a lessons learned kind of activity. And this is, you write this kind of stuff into an incident response plan so that everybody, when there is an incident, it's not a surprise. We've got, we have steps to proceed with. We have numbers to call, and that's why the importance of an incident response plan is paramount. Next slide, please. So your expectations going forward. Email is going to be still a primary threat for attacks. I mean, this is our, like I said earlier, this is our conduit to the outside world. This is how users from the outside connect to us. And so there are a number of phishing emails that contain links and attachments and that are intended malware to, it increases the malware, the distribution of it. So it's not going to go away. The spam is going to continue to be an effective tool for cyber criminals. The crypto mining malware is also going to be growing as well. The insurance industry is going to be forced to make changes as well. They are now they are running the point on minimum security standards, not so much as NIST and some of the other standards of technology. It's going to be cyber insurance that kind of runs that area for the time being, because they're the ones who are recommending higher standards than some of the organizations are used to. But the public entities are going to be increasingly be big targets for attacks, and the potential for declinations in the insurance and lower limits and higher deductibles is something that also we'll probably be seeing in the future. Next slide, please. So what are some of those best practices, best steps? One of them is deploying multi-factor authentication. We're seeing that on every cyber application. Everybody is wanting some sort of multi-factor authentication, whether or not it's part of a remote access or part of email, getting into email. They're looking at that very heavily. Some of the minimum standards, multi-factor is one of them. When MFA is when a user must use 2 or more pieces of evidence to verify their identity and gain access to an application. So it's become a big thing now. Even Google, Microsoft, it's the wave of the future, and in fact it's already here. There's probably going to be even changes to multi-factor because some of the methods right now are becoming less secure, like SMS based one-time tokens. Those phones can be hacked and be gotten into and used for those multi-factor attempts. Next slide, please. Virtual private networks. This isn't anything new. VPNs have been around since '99 when I started. So having a VPN it's a virtual private network is what VPN stands for. It's a service that both encrypts your data and hides your IP address by bouncing your network activity through a secure chain to another server. There's all kinds of VPNs. There's client-based installed VPNs. There's web VPNs. But the important thing is that we want our communication secure when we're browsing the internet, when we're accessing back to our corporate lands. We want to make sure that our connection is secure. Next slide, please. Here's another one that we're seeing in some of our risk assessments, and we want to update software constantly. We want to make sure that our software is updated with we want to replace old versions. We want to make sure that the versions that we've got are patched, and so having outdated software on our network is another very high internet-facing vulnerability. If it's on the internet, one of the things that you can mitigate with some of this, old software or old systems, make sure they're not on the network. If they need to run something, make sure they're segregated from the rest of your network. Next slide. And we touched on it just now, a little end-of-life operating systems. Windows 7, Windows 2, Windows Server 2008. They're not being patched anymore. They're not. There's no support for them, so they won't be closing any vulnerabilities for those end-of-life operating systems. If you're forced to run one, again, keep it segregated from the rest of your network. Keep it segregated from the internet. Next slide. Now here's one that's always a little bit, we get a lot of uggs on this one, but it's a good practice to have a password policy, and a good password policy includes 14 to 16 digits, letters, numbers, special characters, and get changed twice a year, twice per year. The strong password cyber criminals are searching password dictionaries, and they can get passwords, unpack passwords. They can buy lists with passwords in it. An 8-character password can be brute forced in a matter of hours, whereas 14 characters, could take, maybe even take days depending on the password. And even stronger password would be even passphrases. We've used passphrases in the past before, and the trick for IT is to combine security with user usability. And users don't like to change their passwords very much. It's time consuming. It can mess up, but we need, again, going back to making it harder for the criminals to get our stuff. Harder passwords are a big key. Next slide, please. Endpoint detection and response. That's generally antivirus, but with today's technology, antivirus is growing to what we call EDR, endpoint detection and response, where antivirus can actually further detect an attack and actually respond to it, shut down ports, stop the attack while it's in progress. EDR runs a more comprehensive check than antivirus, and it's a notch above the traditional antivirus. Antivirus typically follows signature-based threats. EDR system checks for threats around the clock, and it has data collection and forensic capabilities. So it's a little more robust than actual antivirus. Next slide. Backups and encrypting your backup data. Excuse me. So we talked a little bit about backups in a breach scenario. You want to make sure all your backups are, being collected nightly on a routine basis. We want to make sure those backups are encrypted, so whether they can't, whether or not we're sending them, not much tape is being used much anymore, but a lot of backups are being done diskwise and then sent to the cloud. We want to make sure that those backups are encrypted, and then once they are encrypted, we want to have at least one backup that's disconnected from the network and located off-site. You want to test your backups. You'd be surprised at how much testing doesn't go on, and there's nothing worse than doing full backups and incremental backups, and then coming in with a situation and you need your backups and they're not able to be restored. And so that's testing your backups is key to having good backups.
Hey, Lee, I have a question there. If we have a backup that's kind of saved on an external hard drive when we just kind of sit it on the shelf, does that degrade over time, or are we kind of okay to let it sit there? Do we have to kind of refresh that and change it to a new external hard drive? Does it expire like food, or?
Well, it depends on, if the data itself shouldn't, unless there's something wrong with that hard drive, but the problem is how often are you pulling that data, to that external drive? What kind of data are you putting on there? Are you, are you refreshing it with the new stuff? That kind of degradation is, more than whether or not the data itself actually, disintegrates over time. It shouldn't, but it may be outdated.
And then when we're doing backups, if we do a backup every day, or should we do backups every day? And question number 2 is, do we then write over or delete the old backups, or are we risking poisoning that well if we do that?
No, there's a variety of backup plans. The one that I like the best is, backing up backing up total data, in the evening, and you have a solution that can get data, in increments. So you're doing maybe shadow copies is what they used to call them. Do image backups hourly. Just depends on, uh, you know, the data you're backing up. Databases are usually backed up by themselves, uh, periodically, even in some even 30-minute increments. Uh, but having a good full nightly, and then you know a good full weekly, and then a good full monthly, those are good. You want to keep those and then have them stored. Iron Mountain's a good place. We used to have it stored all the time there. Remote desktop protocol. This is a tough one for me as well, because being an IT person, remote desktop protocol was used heavily for remotely accessing our users' computers when they had issues, remotely accessing servers when they had issues to run programs and that. But if you're using remote desktop protocol, you want to make sure that it's only utilized with MFA and from VPN access. You want to make sure that it's not exposed to the internet. Ensure that network level authentication is enabled, and in some instances, if you've got a big enough organization, you can even set up what's called a remote desktop honeypot. And a honeypot is designed to replicate a real system, and it lures attackers into it. And once the activity is detected, it can then send an alert to IT administrators. I'm not in favor of setting up decoys on our network. For one, it's kind of an expense that most organizations don't want to set up just a random server to decoy people. I mean, it might be fun, but no, I wouldn't. Don't need to set up a server that doesn't do anything but decoy. And next slide, please. So be cautious of clicking on links. This goes back to how we're training our users. Does it we should be telling our users when emails come in, does it contain a link? Does it contain an attachment? Is it asking for money? Does it ask for credentials? Does it ask for any other sensitive information? And can you verify who sent the email? Those are all things that we should be going over in our training programs. The old X-Files question, question everyone. Don't trust anyone, I believe is what it was. Trust no one. That certainly applies to email. And another thing that can help users is a solution that tags the emails when they're coming in. This lets them know that the email is coming in from an outside organization. So if it might be able to tip them off that here's an email that's coming in from our CIO, but hey, it sure does say that it's from outside. So maybe this isn't legitimate. The next slide, please. So what's the future planning and future training? Incident response plans. If you're planning and training for short-term and long-term, you're going to document your policies and procedures and processes and include them in your disaster recovery plan and your incident response plan. The biggest thing that I tell organizations, phone numbers. If we've got them in our plan, we need to be checking them, once or twice a year. Nothing, phone numbers change, people change. So contacts, you need to go through your plans and change your contacts. Provide your employees with cybersecurity awareness training. A lot of organizations are using KnowBe4 for phishing campaigns. Continue to do that, but also include some email compromise and fraudulent transaction training. You can implement, simulated phishing. That's for the KnowBe4, but test your employees regularly. And if they're not, doing well on the tests, retest them. Next slide. So having said all this, I would recommend adopting a cyber risk control program for your organization. and start with cyber risk assessments to strengthen your security posture going forward. You can see our cyber risk assessments. Our cyber risk assessments are becoming pretty popular, and most assessments are the norm going forward. They're going to want you to have some sort of assessment on hand. And during a cyber risk assessment, vulnerability points are identified on your network and systems that include controls, policies, plans, and procedures. I tend to call it more of a gap analysis process. So, everything that IT touches. Thank you for your time.
And so again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat screen, or you can always follow up with Andy Finn after the presentation. But we otherwise want to thank everybody for their time and obviously awareness to these issues, and hopefully we helped. And everybody have a great day.